All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the channel again. Today is Monday and it's 4:50 in the morning, and it's time to get that workout in of the day. Today's video, we're going to be talking about, should you be shooting in 24, 30, 60, or 120 frames per second? It's a little bit of my takes. Now, once again, should you be shooting in a 24, 30, 60, or 100 frames per second? That's going to be something that we're going to talk about in this video, and something that maybe I can help you guys with, because sometimes we don't know exactly when is that we want to shoot those settings, but that's what I'm here for, to help you guys with. But for now, let's get into that workout. Today I'm doing something different. Today I'm going to be going into doing the class, and then after I'm going to be talking about the challenge that I want you guys to maybe follow up on if you guys want to do with me. It's 100 days, 100 reps of the challenge, and it's something just to keep us going on this everyday basis, because man, life can just be very, very, very busy. Sometimes we can be busy with life, and so, you know, over this past few months, it's been really hard for me to really be focused with everything that I want to do, and there's so much going on, and so I put aside my health, and this is why I'm starting the 100 challenge, which every single day I'll be doing something with 100. Today we're going to be focusing on air squats, which basically is just, you know, regular squats with no weights for 100 reps. Something easy, very light, and something that you can probably do under 10 minutes. I know there's things out there like 75 hard that we can all do, where it's something that you actually have to complete 2 workouts and drink a whole gallon of water, and there's just a multitude of things that you have to do. Personally, I just don't have the time for it, and for the first time, I'm actually saying that with so much honesty, that I actually do not have any time for that. But at the end of the day, it is my health. So what I need to do is actually provide myself with a type of program that I can do for myself. And I do think that the best thing for me to do is work out in the morning before coming to work, because as much as I would like to show you guys my whole entire morning routine, is just pretty hard, because basically I will be wasting time. And by the time that I'm driving to Miami, I am stuck in traffic for almost 2 hours. So versus now that it took me about 45 minutes to an hour, a little bit more, an hour and 15 minutes. So plus this is a holiday. But other than that, let's get into what is your camera settings on. Is your camera settings on the 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, 60, or 120? I think the first thing that we should break down is, what is frames per second? So obviously, as the name says, it is frames per second. So how many shots are you taking, essentially pictures, in those seconds? So in 1 second, we're taking 24 frames per second. 30 frames per second, you guessed it, you're shooting 30 images in a second, 60 images in a second, and 120 in a second. My camera, not the one that I'm shooting on, but the Sony a7S III shoots at 1080, which is not 4K, 240 frames per second, per second. So now that we know that, why would you want to use the 24 versus, let's say, the 60? So the 60 is something that you would want to use more when people are moving around, and maybe it's something more sports related, or maybe it's just something that you want to slow down in your post-productions. So let's break down slow motion. That would be one of the reasons why you would want to shoot a 120 frames per second versus a 24 frames per second. Something like what I'm doing now, which is talking to the camera, talking to you guys, is I'm going to only shoot in 24 or maybe even 30 frames per second. I believe that Hollywood standards, that what they like to shoot in is 30 frames per second, which it just gives it a little bit more dynamic movement. The 24 frames per second, actually, it's something that you could still slow down, but it's not going to be as smooth as you would slow down a 60 versus a 120. Slow motion, as what we're talking about, is that when you're shooting at 60 frames per second, it's what I like to shoot in two reasons for the slow motion. One, because I know that in my post-production, I want to slow down the movement in a way where it's going to make it look very cool and very cinematic and a very fitness related video, and that's when I like to shoot my 60 frames per second. But also, I would like to also say that if I am shooting in that 60 frames per second, I'm also thinking about the light, which is something that we're going to talk about in the next shot. When it comes down to the 120 frames per second, the 120 frame per second is something that you definitely want to be shooting if you're trying to get the slowest shots possible in your post-production, and definitely it's going to come down to what's your preference as well. I don't know what editing platform you're using. For me, I'm using Final Cut Pro, so that means that I am and same thing goes for DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro, is that you get to choose a percentage of what you want to shoot, how slow you want to slow down your shot. So once again, if you're going to slow down your 60 frames per second, for me, I can only slow it down up to 50%, which makes it the most optimal flow that you can always get for your 60 frames per second at slow speed. When it comes to your 120, at your 120, you're going to be slowing down to 20%. The reason that I say 20% is because probably most people don't know that. But when I go on Final Cut Pro and I'm editing, I can go down to 25 frames per second. But for some reason, when you go into 20% of that 120 frames per second, it just gives it that delicious touch of slow speed. And it just makes it look very cool, very dramatic, very cinematic. And that's where I really, flourish the most. So that would be for that purpose. Now for the 240, I haven't really been able to play so much with it, but I believe that you can probably do it up to 10%, and that's something that you would have to play around with, because honestly, I don't use it as much. And here's where we're going to talk about the next reason why you would shoot a 120 or a 240 over the 24 frames per second. If you want to shoot at 24 frames per second versus a 60, obviously you're already thinking about the slow speed, and that's what you want to do in your post-production. That will be your main reason. But let's talk about the lighting. The lighting can be very, very complex when it comes to using your slow motion. Why do I say that? Because maybe you're someone who shoots a lot of party videos, and in those party videos, honestly, there's not going to be a lot of lighting. There's going to be a lot of strobe lights, but it won't really be one direct light. Key light, as what we like to call it in photography, videography world, is that key light where it's facing your face and they actually make it pop off. Now, with that being said, this is why lighting is so important when it comes down to what you're trying to shoot. So if I'm somewhere where it's very low light, and let's say the aperture that you're using, which we'll leave it for another video, and if you guys are interested in that, please leave a comment in the comment section below. When it comes down to using your aperture, you want to keep it at under 2.8. So if you're already shooting at a zoom lens, I'm going to assume that it only has up to 2.8, maybe 1.8 the most. So that's very low. Now for a lens like the one that I'm using right now is a 24 G Master. That one has it up to down to 1.4, but that doesn't mean that you're still going to get the most optimal lighting. So shooting at, let's start at 240, that means that you're gonna have to double your shutter speed, and your shutter speed has to go up to 500. If it goes to 500, that means that your image is gonna look darker, which means that the light that you're using, natural light, whether it's the sun or here, where I'm in the office now, it's gonna be even harder to be shooting. Where you see the light now, you're definitely going to need that in order to boost and be able to show your image the way that you want it and have that nice and crispy touch that you want. And it's pretty difficult, When it comes to the 120, you're gonna have to double the shutter speed at 240. Now for this one, of course, it gives you a little bit of more room. And honestly, when you're outside in the light, it's definitely going to be a little bit easier versus when you're shooting at 240. So at the 120 frames per second, it's gonna be a little bit easier, of course, because you don't have to up your shutter speed so high, but you definitely wanna keep that in mind when it comes to lighting. Then it goes down to the 60. The 60, now you have a lot more room in that 120. So that goes down to my key point of why I would use the 60 over the 120 when it comes to really using the slow motion. Now I might be at a gym and it might not be so much light, or maybe there's just one area where there's more light than the other area, and here's where you got to play around with it. So at the 60 frames per second, you're gonna be able to double the shutter speed, and then you're gonna have a lot more room to play with your lighting. And then that way, since it's not such a bright room, but you still have room to actually slow it down, and in your post-production, it will be up to you to really be able to show that slow motion in the ways that you want to. Now, of course, if you're in a dark room, but you have that one key light, you can still go up to that 120 frames per second, but you always have to keep in mind that not all the shots that you're taking needs to be at 120 frames per second. And so that's why the lighting is so important to you guys, and it should be if you guys haven't even thought about that. And when it comes to shooting your videos, now, like I said, something that when I'm shooting now, 24 frames per second, it's perfect. So I hope that's been helping you guys a little bit more, and to really, you know, see the difference between everything. Now I want to move on to something different when it comes to frames per second. So I really understand where you're trying to come from and really say, Navi, like I'm always trying to shoot at 120 because this is gonna give me the most dopest and coolest scenes and footage that I can always get. But the honest truth is that you should not always be shooting at 120 or always shooting at 24. You have to understand why and what's your purpose on these videos. And let me tell you why. I have been going through this for so long, and I've been, you know, always debating. Once you understand what slow motion is and how to use it, you tend to fall in love with it, and you fall into this hole where everything needs to be at 120. But let's think about it. When you're doing fitness videos, do you really always want to slow down? Remember, in real time, you're always trying to move fast. You're always trying to beat the clock. You're always trying to work your hardest. So you need to show that speed. So sometimes you don't want to be doing the slow motion, plus you really want it bright. And also it comes down to your color correction, which leads on to my next point. When it comes to shooting at your 24 frames per second, obviously, you understand that now your shutter speed is at 50, and now there's room for a lot more lighting. Like right now, there's one light here hitting me from this angle. And as it's hitting me, you have to understand that if you're color grading and you're using S-Log as you should be, then you're gonna understand that the lighting is so important when it comes to the kind of look that you're looking for. So this is why it's so important to understand, am I shooting at 24 frames per second for my color grading and my color correcting? So for me personally, I like that vibrant look. And literally just a few months ago, I understand what the difference was. Thankfully for my camera, and this is why you spend the money on your camera, and this is why maybe for those out there who have a business and want to spend money on a camera or want to spend money on a photographer and a videographer that has the best equipment out there to provide for your videos, it's the most important thing is the ISO. Why do I say that? Because you're not always going to be at your base. You're not always going to be at the best settings as possible. But if you have a really good camera that can have, like for example, the Sony a7S III, which is the camera that I use, has that dual sensor that gives you a base ISO from 640 to 5000. And then you have the 12800 to up to, I'm not really sure, but I think it's 512,000. ISO. I always keep my base ISO kind of high just because I do like that bright image, and then when I get to doing the post-production, I actually just darken a little bit and make it look very bright in the face but very dark in the back. It's just something that I like to do. It's my preference, something that you can play with. But like I said, when it comes down to that, it's the color correcting of your footage. So when you're, you know, if you're using picture profile, please, you should play with it first before you go do a client shoot. If your ISO was too high, too bright, and you know the shadows are bright, then you're probably not gonna have the best footage and you're gonna be overexposing. But when it comes to S-Log, it's just a different breed. So when you're doing that, basically you're gonna be at a 2.0 mm, which right now I do not know what it means, but I'll put it right here. But If it's that too high, then you're gonna overexpose your footage and it's just gonna look too, you know, not too good, but in S-Log it's just gonna look really good. So that would be my tip number 3 on you guys. Tip 3, why it would be something that you have to think about when you're shooting your 24, 30, 60, 120, and 240. I'm pretty sure there's cameras out there that shoot up to 500 or 1,000. I believe so. Personally, I don't have the budget, I don't have the money to be out there spending on a nice camera like that. It's probably like over $8,000, surprisingly, right? So at the end of the day, those are the 3 things that you want to be focusing on. The difference between the 24, the 30, 60, and the 120. All the frames per second, the definition of it, and why it's important for you to know. We also talked about the lighting, you know, why you won't need the lighting, and, you know, doubling your shutter speed. When you're at 24 frames per second, you're going to be going to 50, and so forth. And if you're going to be color correcting, color grading, you always got to understand the lighting part of it. So if you are trying to create a look that is very bright, you definitely want to be exposing your footage correctly, versus when you're shooting in picture profile, maybe for your vlog, maybe for something that is not too professional. You're definitely going to want to keep it low and keep it at a 0.0 mm, the little, you know, millimeter. You definitely want to keep your ISO and your footage exposed the correct way. Last but not least, starting the morning. I already have my pre-workout, don't judge me, but that's because I woke up and I had to work out, all that fun stuff that you guys like to hear about. Now it's time to start off the day with Celsius. Today's flavor is sparkling strawberry lemonade. Now that might be like a lot of caffeine to you guys, but honestly it's only 200 milligrams of caffeine, to me at least. And I'm fucking tired, so I need to really get some shit done today. And if you guys haven't tried this, I'm about to put you on right now. I always like to do this part. All right, now it's time to get to work. All right, so now I'm home and I get to relax a little bit and get a little bit more work done, but I hope that you guys learned something now that you guys are experts on knowing what frames should you be shooting on. It's either 24, 30, 60, and 120, and you'll obviously have higher frame rates. Now that you guys understand this though, I really hope that you go out there and shoot and really use what's best for you. You know, not everybody's gonna have the ideal situation, but of course you have to understand what your camera is capable of, because these tools are so powerful for you that obviously you can create the most dopest cinematic films of all time. So go out there, be creative, and if I helped you in any way, please make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video where we can talk a little bit more about cameras. If that's something that you like, subscribe, and if you obviously are doing the whole entire 100 reps of whatever movement you like to do, go ahead and tag me on my Instagrams, which I'll be putting it right here. See you guys in the next one. 3, 2, 1. All right, baby, day 1 of the challenge, right? 100 reps of anything that you like.
All right, today is air squats.
All right, give it to him. And we're back on video mode. Babe, day 1 of the challenge.
That sucked, but
It was good.